So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to the Indicator of Behavior subproject meeting. I'm Charlie Frick from Johns Hopkins APL, happily serving as your chair and host for today's call. I thought I'd, just wanted to welcome. We have a lot of new faces today, and so just wanted to welcome everybody. I won't put you on the spot right now, but as we get through our technical content, we'll have an open discussion, and anybody that would like to have a moment to introduce themselves, we'll gladly welcome you to the fold, and happy to have you here with us today. So to start with, I wanted to just cover one small little bit of housekeeping, and then I wanted to then talk a little bit about some of our upcoming outreach efforts for the project. And then Carter graciously has offered to give us a little technical discussion on some of his work with, I think it's pronounced AICA, Automated Intelligent Cyber Defense Agent, and some of the behavior identification tasks that he's working on for that I think could be really useful for us to consider. And then we'll bring up any other additional business towards the end. So to start with, not being a broken record, but just wanted to share that if any members of the project are interested in being a maintainer for the GitHub, always feel free to reach out to me on Slack or via email, and we can discuss that. Right now, Kurt Korolenko and myself serve as the maintainers, but just in the spirit of openness, always willing to share responsibilities with other members of the project if somebody wants that. Speaking of the repository, I wanted to share my screen for a moment. And last week, talked a little bit about this, or last month, I mean, but let's move this over here so we can see. But we do have some use cases that we're able to get uploaded there. So not expecting, might be a little hard to see. So I'll see if I can blow it up a little. But we just have a few generalized use cases to start off with for ways that one might create, share, or modify bundles like we've made in our reference implementation to help people get a feel for how do we envision folks working with these. These are available on the GitHub. I'll share the links in the minutes and in the chat in a moment when I stop the screen share. But just letting you know, these will be available on GitHub. We have the little simple UML, but then for each case, we have a little dedicated small write-up with a kind of sequencing diagram to understand the entities and tasking, but then we also provide them in a BPMN workflow. Also, I'd like to invite, if anybody's interested in partnering with us, we are actively working on representing these in Cacao format as well. So we've got a start on that work, but if anybody's got a huge interest in Cacao, we're glad to partner up and share our notes and what we've got so far, as we're just continuing to make sure it's perfectly aligned with the current spec for that standard. Additionally, happy to bring up the discussion. We can talk a little bit now, but also through the Slack and listserv on additional cases. I know Duncan Sparrow couldn't make it today, but he shared desire to see some overarching use cases similar to the Styx ransomware and anti-cryptocurrency attack. I'm going to say that wrong at the moment, but that's something we definitely can look into. I'm biased a little towards if we're going to do that, to maybe start with the scenario that we used for the reference implementation. So just letting you guys know, feel free to check out the use cases on the repository. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And it looked like I might have had and Jane shared a great point regarding Cacao, that a ballot just opened today for updates to the spec. So we should be seeing a revision of Cacao soon. So for those of you that might have participated on reviews of the spec, be interesting to see some of the new developments there. But I thought I'd just take a second and see, do we have any questions related to the topic of use cases? I know UML is the most exciting thing on earth, so I just but I'll give a moment in case anybody had something they wanted to ask on that, and I'll be glad to answer that. As is custom, I take awkward silence as concurrence. So I thank you guys for that. I now want to take just a few more moments to talk about some of our upcoming outreach efforts and recognize some of the folks here today that have been able to help us out a lot. So you'll see Claudia Rausch graciously logging in this evening. And Claudia has been a tremendous help. I just want to say everything, that I've been able to do to help get the repository working, most of our communications, or anything at all working for the group, Claudia has been an integral part of, and always grateful for everything she does for us and all of the OCA. But additionally, you guys might have seen a press release put out a couple weeks ago about the IOB project, which we were really excited about. And to help promote that, I've written a small blog post on kind of why we see a need for it. And Claudia has been helping me get that reviewed and ready for release. And I believe it's coming out this week, probably tomorrow. And just want to take a moment and say thank you for that, Claudia.
Thank you, Charlie, for everything, right? So hi, everyone who doesn't know me. I work for Oasis Open as the open source program manager. And I'm probably the primary contact for anything related OCA from the community with what Oasis can do to help make OCA successful. So please feel free to reach out to me either on Slack, the OCA Slack, or via email. And nice to meet you all.
Yeah. And going along with that blog post, I also wanted to thank Roseanne, who next week has graciously invited me to speak at the OCA office hours. So we'll be talking a little bit. We'll have the blog post this week, OCA office hours next week to discuss the project and help share with other folks interested from the other sub-projects inside OCA that dial in to learn more about it, which is culminating in some great news that we received from Jane Harnard over at Oasis. Unfortunately, I wrote a conference submission on this project for RSA, but was not lucky enough to be accepted. However, RSA has been talking with Oasis and agreed that they would promote a few webinars on behalf of Oasis if Oasis wanted to host some webinars. And Jane reached out to me and said that they felt that the IOB would be one of those webinars they'd like to have promoted by RSA. And so we're going to do that. And the announcement should be coming out soon. We're going to host a webinar on March 1st at, I think, 11 o'clock a.m. US Eastern Time. And it's going to be a panel discussion. And so I also want to thank Harley Parks on the call today, who's going to be our moderator, and Carter Bullard, who's agreed to be one of our panelists. And also Jason Kiersted from IBM Security, who couldn't make it today. He'll be a panelist. And I'm very sad to inform you all that I will be your third panelist. So you will have to hear my lovely voice for even more time. But we are very excited about this, and we will be sure to record the webinar, of course, but looking forward to hopefully with some of that cross promotion with RSA to get our interests and tasks out to a wider audience. And I think many people who have sat through a lot of my talks will be excited to hear this will be a Neo4j free discussion. There will be no, I won't be putting up screenshots of Stix.jsons or nodal graphs during the panel discussion. But we want to kind of get towards some of the work we've been doing, but also some of the other topics that we've been interested in. So, as we get through our technical discussion today, I think Carter's going to bring up some really good ideas that we should be looking at. And we'll get to kind of share with the community some of our interests and maybe get some more folks to join up and help us out. And so towards the outreach efforts, just wanted to know, does anybody have any general questions about some of those things coming up with the blog office hours or the webinar? Most excellent then. All right. Then I'd like to jump right into our technical talk for this month. So Carter, you've been a long time friend and supporter of this project and been very grateful for the questions and inputs you brought in through our meetings over the months, and very happy to listen to what you have to say today about the Automated Intelligent Cyber Defense Agent. And I wasn't sure which title to use to introduce you, so I thought I'd let you introduce yourself and give your own title.
Well, thanks, Charlie. So it's good to see familiar faces and some new faces. I'm Carter Bullard. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity for a company called NEA Systems in Pittsburgh. NEA is a off-road autonomy company. We do autonomous navigation for military vehicles. Little bitty ones and really big ones. I think that's the best way to describe it without going into too much detail, but some lethal and some non-lethal. And so it's a very interesting environment. And I would have to say that for the last 10 years, most of the autonomous vehicles, the large ones, are experiments. They're more like proof of concept type things, but things are changing radically in the military. And I'd like to dive into some of the challenges that I'm running into trying to develop a cybersecurity program for an autonomous vehicle, and talk to you about the approach we're going to take and some of the challenges there, and how the indicators of behavior is really going to be a critical part of the implementation of a cyber capability for an autonomous vehicle. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. So I'm going to grab the screen and share my slide deck. Can I do that?
Should be able to. If not, let me know and I'm seeing it now.
Okay, so it's capable. Good. So yeah, go to NEA website. It's nearobotics.com, and you'll see a lot of different kinds of vehicles that we drive around. And we're very much known for off-road autonomy. Everybody thinks of on-road autonomy and things like Tesla's autopilot, I guess that's what they call it. Off-road autonomy is completely different, and it has a lot of interesting challenges, but the military is the primary customer right now and in the off-road autonomy world, but there's still a mining industry business there. So driving very large vehicles and dumping dirt and going and getting some more dirt and dumping some dirt is really important use of autonomous navigation. This first slide, let's just go ahead and get into the cyber part. We're going to deliver what's called a level 5 autonomous vehicle at the end of this year to the US government. If you know anything about autonomy, well, autonomy comes in 5 levels. In your car, there's definitely a level 1 and a level 2 autonomy that's there. So lane departure avoidance and that, and assisted driving mechanisms such as I guess throttle control or cruise control is considered to be an autonomous operation for a car. Level 5 autonomy means that there is no human at all. It's not connected to a network. It's just driving by itself. And it's a very, very interesting condition for a vehicle. And if you're going to protect a vehicle using cyber protection strategies, and it's an autonomous vehicle at level 5, you're really going to be completely autonomous. Nobody's going to be involved. And so you have to be, everything has to be contained within the vehicle. There's not going to be a radio that you can talk to on the outside to get any kind of intelligence information or any kind of human involvement. So to build a system like this, you have to build a completely independent, self-contained cyber capability. And it's pretty challenging. It's pretty exciting, actually. So if you go through this little list of topics on this slide, we're going to do a cyber agent. And so that's going to be the CA part. It's going to be autonomous because the car is going to be autonomous. That's an ACA. And we do an awful lot of ML and AI. So it's going to have some learning and some intelligence associated with it. And that becomes an ACA. But the question is, how intelligent is it and how capable is it? So that's an IACA. But if you look in the literature in the industry, you find that the military has beaten this idea pretty well up, and they call it the autonomous intelligent cyber agent. And there's a reference architecture and a standard that's been developed for NATO for this type of capability. And the Army Research Lab has kind of embraced it and has published several papers on the reference architecture. So we're going to implement one of these things and put it in one of our vehicles. And the definition is pretty interesting. It's an intelligent software agent performing active, largely autonomous cyber defensive actions on military networks of computing devices. That's, I think, just if you take off those last 5 words, you get the gist of it. It doesn't have to be a military vehicle, but all of these documents talk about that. So I just kind of left it in there. The key terms here are that it's active cyber defense. It's an artificial cyber defender or hunter. It's intelligent, autonomous, and it's mobile. It's capable of autonomous planning and execution of complex cyber actions all by itself. It uses adversarial reasoning to counter thinking adaptive malware. And these are the actual terms in the reference architecture. So it's a pretty interesting sort of thing. And it has to survive encounters with determined and sophisticated enemies. So that's why that has that military sort of flair to it. It's a military document. So it's pretty well documented. It's pretty well thought about. It hasn't been implemented anywhere, at least in the world that we can live in outside of, say, a classified world. So I think it's because it's a pretty lofty, forward-thinking concept that you'll have a learning, autonomous, active cyber capability and in their discussions of this, they expect this to recognize zero-day impactful actions and correct them all on the fly. So it is pretty forward-thinking, and it's kind of a fantasy sort of process or agent in small aspects of the document. When you read the whole document, it actually makes some sense, and they do develop it in ways to where it has a progression of capabilities as it moves from first day implementation to its ultimate sort of realization. Okay, so these are the requirements of the AICA. So there are lots of them. The ones on the left in black, they're pretty approachable today. They're not, they are rational, reasonable. The concept that it resides on a military platform is only because it's a military document. So, but it has to observe and understand its environment. It has to observe and influence all the computational elements under its protection. So it has to be able to change firewalls. It has to be able to turn processes off. It has to be able to turn process back on. It needs to, I'm just going down the list and looking for something interesting. It has to make provisions for local human control if it needs it. So there is an opportunity for it to seek out assistance, but that's not considered to be a primary function or mechanism. The ones on the right are the ones that make it really interesting. they function autonomously, able to make non-trivial plans, achieve a given goal, be able to perform autonomous learning, which is pretty challenging, operate effectively in a compromised environment, resist to compromise. It should be hidden. I think their concept is that this is a kind of a clandestine piece of software that is looking for stuff to fix. And they think it needs to be clandestine so that the malware doesn't see it and kill it. So that's a curious sort of characteristic. And I like the last one. It has to be able to self-propagate to a remote friendly computing device. Now that's what I mean by that kind of gets into the fantasy world, this notion that this thing's going to propagate around to all these devices and start destructively taking out malware. That sounds like malware to me, right? So it's an interesting sort of descriptor. But this is a very interesting piece of software, and one that we're going to implement because it does have a lot of very good capabilities associated with it, and it fits the model for an autonomous vehicle. So here's the architecture that they see an autonomous intelligent cyber agent would have. Now, if you look at these, if you know much about autonomy in general and how machine learning is involved in autonomous action, these are very familiar architectures, okay? If you look at this and you're an active cyber defensive person, you'll see that this looks an awful lot like detection, SIM activity, and SOAR actions. So you can abstract these boxes and blocks, get it into a traditional cyber architecture pretty quickly. But some of these things they seem to be just keywords, but they're incredibly important. This concept of, on the left, this world state identification. Sorry, I misspelled the word state here. This is a critically important piece of this puzzle that's very complicated. This is how the agent comes to understand its world and what it can recognize and what it can perceive and what it can do. So just having a block with 3 words on it doesn't give it justice, of course, in any way. How it interacts with learning, how it interacts with planning and collaboration are pretty complicated. And so, but this is a pretty traditional architecture for autonomy. And you can break it down and you can break autonomy, normal autonomy, like for navigation or for planning or something like that. And you can convert this architecture into a active cyber defensive type of architecture, where you have cyber perception, planning, mitigation planning, and then active cyber defense. So when it comes down to behavior and indications of behavior, it's all over this architecture, but most people think of it at first as a part of perception. So I kind of tried to highlight a little bit of the challenges in cyber perception for the IACA and put it into context for the IOB sort of area of work here. So behavioral identification, tracking, classification, learning, and reporting, these are critical elements to the function of the IACA. We always make comparisons between navigation autonomy because that's pretty well understood sort of thing, and this cyber autonomy, which is kind of, you have to abstract it in order to find the similarities between the two. But you can think of LiDAR, and how do you convert a point cloud into a boulder so that the vehicle knows that there's something it has to learn to get around on the road in order to proceed to where it's going? It's pretty easy to see how that's a similar sort of situation to cyber detection, cyber recognition, perception, mitigation planning, and then actual mitigation. So that's kind of where the abstracts come from. That's kind of where we're coming from. So when you decide you're going to take this model, you have to convert sensing and perception into cyber sensing and perception. And to do that, you have to be able to realize this concept of the world state. And you have to use world modeling, learning, and collaboration in order to do that. And that's where we think indicators of behavior are really going to be an incredibly important thing for the IACA. And in particular, it's going to be messaging. The messaging between every one of these blocks in this particular diagram. We need to be able to convey the existence of behaviors, convey characteristics of behaviors, and report on certain aspects of behavioral activity in and around the vehicle in order to realize this AI sort of process. So, questions so far? Is this interesting yet?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So what do we need indications of behavior for here? So we need to be able to identify threats and risk to an autonomous vehicle during its mission. It's not just to the vehicle, but it's also the vehicle's mission itself that's going to be the object of the attack. So we need to be able to we want to use indications of behavior to help us to understand that condition. So the first thing that we have to do is develop behavioral self-awareness for the vehicle. It has to understand its own worldview. It has to understand what its behavior is doing. We have to understand what its predicted behavior will be, projected behavior. And so we have to understand that so we can understand how things can impact its mission and how attacks can try to subvert that. So we also need to be able to detect, just like we all would expect, the traditional attack behaviors for any kind of OT, IT device. So, it's going to be a lot of the same basic cyber protections, access control behaviors, internal computational and communication dynamic behaviors, and time of day phenomenon, situational phenomenon, because we're a mobile, dynamic, cyber physical device, realizing that when the car turns left, that there's a dynamic shift in the vehicle, because we want to be able to detect that the car told us that we were turning left, but we really didn't turn left, that the kind of spoofing that can occur inside of a dynamic cyber physical device, we want to be able to detect that sort of stuff. And we will also need to be able to detect behavioral issues that are very specific to the autonomous vehicle mission itself. So autonomous vehicles are overwhelmed by this concept of navigation. And there are lots of attacks on navigation. One in particular is GPS spoofing and degradation.
Hey, Carter, we have a question from the chat.
Yeah, please.
So Daryl was wondering, has a tree or list of human-machine, machine-to-machine, and machine-to-human interaction vectors been created for the system?
Oh, no. That sounds formal and intelligent and thoughtful.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think, this kind of stuff, there are lots of pockets of expertise in this area. And this is a particularly important problem for lots of different people. So there's been some work on real true threat assessments, for instance, but it's not to the point that you see outside of the military. All right. If you have classifications, you might, if you have clearances, you may be able to see some of this. But for the most part, it's not as well developed as it is in other areas. And I think the only reason that is because there's a rush to transition this kind of concept into an operational state. So there's going to be a lot of missing stuff in this paradigm, if you don't mind me saying something like that. Does that answer the question? Is Daryl?
Yeah, no, I'm here. Yeah, it does answer the question. You're right. I was just looking for a formal, it's the same question I ask of anyone when they're doing IOB stuff. But yeah, that makes sense. It's like, nobody's really thinking from an interventionist engineering perspective. They're just thinking from a functional, usually, right?
Yeah, in my experience with some of these kinds of special devices in the cyber sort of analysis, it comes a little bit after the fact. You set it up, you get it in there, but a lot of people can't predict all of the complexities of these this machine-human interaction and machine-to-machine action especially. So it's a discovery after the fact, I think, where a lot of these taxonomies show up. But right now,
Okay.
there's not a lot of this right now. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So get back to GPS spoofing. That's really important. So the idea that someone is going to cause you to shift 4 feet in your latitude and longitude and altitude could be the difference between being a successful navigation device and a non-successful navigation device. You're going to run into a tree if they move you 4 feet away from where you're supposed to be. The actual tolerances for safety and on-road vehicles is like 10 centimeters. I think they assume that if you aren't aware of where you are by plus or minus 10 centimeters, you're going to hit a curb when you take a left or right turn. So off-road navigation device vehicles have mechanisms for doing GPS solutions, as they call it, without GPS, and GPS denied and GPS challenged environments. And so the idea of a detector for GPS spoofing, there are lots of radio ways of doing it. And then there are lots of systems that compare multi-solution environments for consistency. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And how do you describe that? How do you generate an indicator of behavior for GPS spoofing when there are about 15 or 20 different kinds of issues? Some are analytically based on systems that are not questionable, but have their own statistical issues. And how can a receiver of the indication of a GPS spoofing situation, how can he really make the decision to switch from one GPS to another, to a different solution, to the state where he doesn't trust GPS at all? And he has to, or she has to kind of drive blindly, or however it is that he's going to drive. And or just drive in the absence of GPS. For off-road navigation, GPS isn't nearly so critical because we're not using maps necessarily to make decisions on whether to turn left, right, or go straight. We actually have all these LiDARs and radars and cameras, and we're trying to figure out where we can go independent of the map. But understanding GPS risk and threat issues, I believe, is a perfect example of how indicators of behavior can inform the agent as to what it can and can't believe in this environment. Now, this might be different from what you guys think in terms of behaviors, but I'm a classic sort of psychologically trained, well, what's the right word? Classically trained psychologist. I used to be a psychopharmacologist in my previous life. And so I think of stimulus response and operant conditioning behaviors. And I think of how do I report on new behaviors or aberrant behaviors relating to things like spoofing. And I find it to be very interesting, and I find it to be an interesting challenge to be able to generate an alarm with metadata that can be standardized so that we can say we have an indication of this behavior over here. So I like to use these conditions as a kind of a guide as to what kind of information I would want to put into that indication. Lots of sensor spoofing scenarios. There are scenarios where they have found malware in firmware for cameras that insert objects into the field of view. Cartoon little cat shows up in the middle of your camera as you're driving at 50 miles an hour down the road. I just think that's hilarious. And it's very dangerous, of course, because the car wants to avoid it, but it's not there. So how do you report that? I took a hard left turn at 40 miles an hour because I saw a cat in the middle of the road. okay, it's just an interesting problem, but it's the kind of reporting that you absolutely have to have in order, if you want to have assured autonomy or trusted autonomy or any kind of accountable autonomy. So if you're building machine learning environments, if you're building intelligent autonomy systems, and it's going to be centered or based around abstract objects like behaviors, the ability to report on those behaviors with good timing and good situational awareness, it's critical to training these systems and to advancing the systems and to explaining why the system did what it's doing.
So
Okay,
Carter, I had
go ahead.
I had a question for you.
Sure, please.
So for the agent to have awareness of all this information, is it safe to assume that it would be connecting to some sort of, I'm not saying it's a CAN bus, but some sort of internal comms where it can observe everything? Would that be the?
Yeah. So one of the requirements of the AICA is that it have complete observability of the network. All right. Very much like what's the all of a sudden I'm blanking on it's like I'm blanking on my own name. Zero trust architectures require you to have complete visibility of the network. So these constructs are actually finding their way into these systems pretty quickly. So yeah, so the CAN bus is important. I'll tell you that 95% of autonomy for these vehicles runs on automotive Ethernet. Okay. They interact with the CAN bus to actually manipulate the vehicle itself and to get health and status from the vehicle. But the sensors and what they call the autonomy kit and the component that interacts with the CAN called the by-wire kit or the B kit, that's all automotive Ethernet. So we're back into what looks like a traditional IT architecture, right? The CAN bus is an ICS architecture.
Yeah.
Because it's all, little controllers, things that only have, firmware basically, and very little memory and very little language or communications capabilities. But all this other stuff, this high level stuff, it's really IT type technology and IoT type technology. So it actually has a much larger and much more interesting threat surface and attack strategy. So so the reason go ahead.
No, I was saying thank you. That was all.
Yeah. So when you start getting into what do you have to look for in these vehicles to make a decision that you have an internal attack problem or some complex behavioral impingement on the ICS part of the vehicle, it's really, there aren't a lot of, how do I say it, existing frameworks that you can use. MITRE's attack has got a great deal of good, specific kinds of things to look for. So one of the things I'm looking for in these vehicles is lateral movement, for instance. That's really critical. We want to see if something like one of the cameras is trying to discover its environment and try to understand what kind of vehicle is it in, that kind of stuff. But the kinds of things that impact the specific mission itself are a little bit different, and some of them are non-traditional assets and values within an IT infrastructure. So you don't have a lot of stuff to grab and just reuse in order to report on some of these conditions. Now it's the messaging of these things that's the most important, I think. So when you change something from sensing to perception, there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done. And you take a lot of data and you turn it into a very simple indicator. Like I have a boulder in the road. I have malware in this device. I have a potential rogue device on the bus of the vehicle. These are generally realized through a large amount of analysis, a large amount of data over a long period of time, minutes, okay, not microseconds. So the important thing in the vehicle and the way that these autonomy systems work, it's going to be messaging of this indication to a large number of components, more than 5 or 6 within the vehicle in a reasonable amount of time, sub-second sort of notification. And that's going to be, I think, the biggest use of IOB in this model is going to be internal software to software communication of world state and conditions and the impact of action. So that I think might put a little stress on the IOB sort of model of what an IOB actually is. And some people in the group might think that, well, there are other messaging methods that we can use to float this stuff around. But I think that I don't want to work in 5 different working groups to solve this problem, you know? And so I think that the indicators of behavior strategy, leveraging existing formats, sticks messaging, and things like that, is exactly what this kind of effort needs, just to focus, standardize messaging and things like that. Now, one of the other things that's really important is data sharing, okay, for learning and collaboration. Now, inside the vehicle, there are going to be multiple agents that need to collaborate, negotiate based on the view of what's going on in the vehicle. And collaboration isn't just simply, hey, I got a yellow shoe over here that's in my tire. I like those kind of abstractions because they're ridiculous. Hopefully you'll smile a little bit when I say that. But the idea of collaborating in order to solve the problem of the shoe and the tire is a lot of messaging, lots of processing, lots of awareness. And learning will happen, and learning really needs to go back to, if I can go back real quick to this model, it involves using these databases, right? So somewhere on these databases is going to be an inventory of behaviors and what you can do with them. There's going to be an inventory of subcomponents of behaviors and how you can find comparisons between, I see this guy it's yellow. What over here have I got that's yellow that I can use to try to fix this problem? And so, so the IOB thing to me is not just simply a simple indicator, but it's also a data element that I can use for learning and collaboration. And so that's how I think about it. And that's why I'm going to try to use the IOBs as a critical part to the development of this kind of a system. So inevitably, we get to the question, well, what is then an indicator of behavior? Let me get rid of this thing. What kind of messages are they? And what can you do with them? So I don't have the answer. I just know that I have a gut feeling that I need a bunch of stuff. So I've tried to break it down into some categories and some types. So I need to be able to understand the difference between self and other behavioral actions, right? So to me, that could just be a bit in the message. Hey, this is my behavior, and this is something else's behavior. But I think that concept of having some elaborations on what other is really important. I hope you guys can recognize that the object that needs to be protected will have its own inherent behaviors. And one of the key elements to active cyber defense and mitigation is that you recognize that your self behavior is more normal than the previous condition. So you have an attack, it deviates you from your normal behavior, and the goal is to bring you back into some kind of normality. So the understanding of self is really important. And that distinction, I think, is really a critical part of what I see as the use of IOBs. So I think there are 4 fundamental behavior types, and I think everybody will agree on the first 2. Brand new behavior we've never seen before, and anomalous behavior. But we don't think about filling in the missing gaps, which is the missing behavior, all right? So the difference between anomalous behavior and missing behavior is, Anomalous behavior is an actual observed behavior that is different from expected. But that's not missing behavior. Missing behavior is where I'm expecting to see something and it's not there. So in navigation autonomy and the ability to reason out of what is a path and what's available to us and where we can go, missing objects are really important. They're called negative obstacles, and they represent holes and trenches and things like that, and the car can turn over or go off a cliff and things like that. But in this case, missing behavior might be a primary or secondary indication of an attack or an attack outcome. So for instance, I expect DNS traffic to be seen at a relatively simple rate. I expect to see DNS in this vehicle at least once every 30 seconds because of the various components that are going on inside the vehicle, but I haven't seen a DNS request in 2 minutes. More than likely, that's a bad situation. And to be able to report that I am missing a behavior in my expected mix is really important. But it does beg the question of all these three things are comparing against an expected behavioral mix. What's normal, all right? And if all I do is report on emergent, anomalous, and missing behavior, I'm not getting everything that I need to create that worldview of what's going on, all right? So I think indicators of behavior should be able to indicate the existence of normal behavior. And I think that that's an incredibly important thing in active cyber defense. I see that I've diverted away from a normal state, and I can generate an alarm that says, hey, I got too many packets over here. I need to be told that that went away. Okay, it can't just simply be, I'm getting too many packets every 30 seconds, and then that indicator just stops. And that assumes then that I'm in a normal range, right? So I think that it's gonna be important in general cybersecurity to be able to understand the terminating state of an anomalous condition. But for machine learning and machine learning comparisons and for collaboration, I think it's going to be really important that we be able to report on normal behavior. I am seeing that everything is cool, right? Now there's a problem with that. So the problem is that the way you know that something is normal is because you have prior knowledge. You have a baseline. And the baseline behaviors are the basics of what Mosaics does. And the US DoD ACI TTP is all about go get your baseline and compare existing observations to the baseline. Sometimes you don't want to report the baseline. You don't want to tell all of your sensors and all of your things, oh, this is the complete knowledge that I have happening right now. You don't really want to share that, but you do want to be able to say that I see DNS traffic as an example, and it's normal, okay? And I think that those are going to cover my conditions, the 4 basic conditions of normality, anomalous behavior, emergent behavior, and missing behavior. And I think I can do just about everything I need. Now, what do I mean by behavior? Well, it doesn't matter. You know, if it's packets per second, which I see as a behavior, or if it's there are a lot of situations that people have seen that having microphones on a vehicle has generated a lot of sensory data that can be exploited for lots of different conditions. Interesting thing you can do with echoes using just a traditional microphone. So the idea that you hear a chickadee, you know, and that you recognize it, and that somehow is an expected behavior and it's normal, that sounds great. We should be able to represent that and give that to the cyber agent. And it might sound ridiculous, but there are going to be a lot of sensory-based perceptions that are going to be seen as non-traditional leading indicators to either attack outcomes or predecessors to attack. And I think that we just ought to be able to be in a position to formulate pretty quickly, hey, I got a behavior that I don't know what it is. This sensor is telling me something that it hasn't seen before, and let me give you some metrics associated with it. Okay, so so the idea here, what are the contents of these messages? Now, this is where it gets hard for me. Like I said earlier, I'm a classic operant conditioning classical conditioning kind of guy. So I think about behaviors as being strict stimulus response relationships. So even though I might have an observable, I'm going to look for, was it stimulated, or is the observable the stimulus and I'm waiting for the response? And for me to do cause analysis or root cause analysis, I want to be able to pair any kind of observable with with its role of whether it's a stimulus or a response. And but that's the way I think about it. Not everybody at all thinks like that. There are many, many theories of behavior, lots of different kinds of things, and a lot of different approaches to this problem. So like a MITRE observable, like I see lateral movement with a little bit of descriptions. I don't know what caused it, and I don't know if it causes anything to happen. It's just an observable. So that, I think, is a behavioral class, and we should be able to describe it, say it's an observable, and move on. But I think the critical element in machine learning environments is the detector itself. What generated the indicator? If I have a certain kind of detector, I can generate a certain kind of alarm. If I modify that detector just a little bit, I may not generate that alarm again because I've changed some thresholds, or I changed the method, or I trained it on different source data, so it doesn't even recognize that problem anymore. So behavioral indicators of behavior are going to be tagged specifically to the detector that generates the indication. And so in the message, I think we need detector identifiers so that we understand, you know, I like this detector. I trust this detector. I believe it. So if it's what told me this, then I'm going to put a high confidence number on this message. Got to have time dynamics. And all of them have some temporal statistical descriptors and quantitative measures. So I'd like to have some of those. I don't need them all, but I'd like to have some of those so that the agent or the guy who receives the indicated behavior can score it and value whether it's a reasonable indicator or not. Okay, that's all I got on this topic today. Hopefully that's food for thought.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any opinion? I think would be very interesting. I'm fascinated with how you guys think about this type of
yeah,
topic.
really interesting stuff. You know, we like to think of information content as a great way to kind of rank the impact of different elements of an IOB or a behavior on its, you know, priority for investigation. Does that align to kind of how you're thinking about identifying what's the contributor factor?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm interested in the fact that, you know, I learned a detector that's based off machine learning and massive amounts of training with lots of data. You generally are brittle detectors. And so you change the training data a little bit, and what they start spitting out are completely different. So I personally am really curious about that and trying to deal with false positive suppression attempts that create a bad detector all of a sudden. So I want to know that the version changed and the data changed. But is that something I'm going to run into on a day-to-day basis? Not really, but I'm really curious on that from an electoral perspective. That's why I want to put that kind of data in there. But I'm really still challenged by like this GPS spoofing thing. How am I going to capture the concept that I got a 0-day GPS spoof condition. I know what my longitude and latitude should be. My GPS is telling me something else. I don't know why. And it's lasted more than 2 minutes. You have to do that because reflections off of buildings can, what they call multi-path GPS, can cause you to think you're about 20 feet away, you know. And so you have to get past that and watch it come back. And now you know that somebody really is trying to spoof your GPS. So how do you describe that? How do you report that? You know, is it just a difference? Or do I need to give it as much information as I have from the GPS source that's failing in order for the receiver to evaluate it and understand what the real deal is, you know? So that's my interest.
Yeah. At first, it seems to me that my brain kind of goes a little bit more towards the mosaics examples of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a tiered set of responses. I'm thinking in an autonomous vehicle, where first I want to do more of the, kind of the system integrity checks, whether it's spoofing or some other problem with the GPS. I want to know, is there a problem with it? Does it and then can I restore it? Now, I think I get what you're saying, is that I'm going to eventually need to know how it's failing to know which course of action to take to, if it's spoofing, I can reset it all day. If the signal is being spoofed, I can reset it all day long. It's still going to receive a bad signal.
Right. So
as opposed to if it's injected
and there it's a trust thing, right? Which one am I trusting? The only way I recognize the failure is one detector gives me X and a similar detector gives me Y. I need a third one, right? And then I need a fourth and a fifth one, and then I need, then I can't make a decision. So,
and then thinking whether you need to abstract I'm not sure. It's probably too far in the weeds and not well formed in my head yet, but it seems like you'll need some level of abstraction across detectors to compare all the disparate bits of information. I mean, big fan of the IOB, obviously, but I mean, like, something's going to have to run on these.
Yeah, absolutely. So these aren't, it's not a condition in which you have to have an a priori solution to begin with. All right. The reason I mentioned GPS spoofing is that it's an interesting problem. How you come about detecting it is very curious and interesting, and it generates doubt. Am I going to generate an indicator behavior today for GPS spoofing? No, I'm gonna understand the system. Well, not today, tomorrow.
We have another 60 seconds on this call, Carter. Don't give up.
Right. Okay, here's the solution. So, but the idea is IOB as a schema or as a strategy somebody should be able to figure out, oh, I'm going to put this in this area with some numbers. I'm going to put this in this area. I'm going to have some metadata here, and I'm going to have like a source identifier, and then I'm going to have some kind of confidence number in there, right? And to me, there you go. That's a good starting point. And do we have a confidence indicator in IOB today? Do we use it a lot? Does anybody use it at all? And I think that in this autonomous navigation thing, the reason I see it to be such an important part for IOB is there's a chance that it is not going to have an external reference to send its indicators to and let somebody else munge on it, let a human look at it and then decide what to do. It's all going to be in this little box. And so we have to have enough thought into, do the messages, do the indicators, are they rich enough, or in order for some of these things to come to these conclusions on their own. And so the behavioral descriptor to me is the most important. Understanding that the detector is a source of change that has to be accounted for as the agent learns things as it's going along. But I'm really thinking that the behavioral metrics, what does the detector use, and what do I need to give to the next guy in the pipeline in order for it to build confidence that the detector is giving me a good indicator, you know? I mean, the idea of what is a behavior and how am I going to describe that? Well, that's a different sort of ball game, but you know, but I think there are about 5 or 6 of these conditions, like GPS spoofing, sensor spoofing. There's object modifications for what do they call it? Divergence. You know how you can take a 60-mile-an-hour speed sign and turn it into a 15-mile-an-hour speed sign just by putting dots on the sign just the right way. Those are very interesting and curious problems that you don't see in DNS servers in an enterprise. You know, so the idea that there are some really strange behaviors that need to be, we ought to be able to handle them in IOB, you know. So, well, that's my push on this stuff. I really do want to find a way to talk about behaviors, discover behaviors, report on behaviors, learn them, and then detect anomalies associated with them. And I think IOB's got a great start at doing some of that. I think the autonomous vehicle thing makes it a little bit more mysterious and elegant and interesting. But I think, and there are curious things there, but I think the IOB group can absorb this stuff pretty easily and maybe add a few content elements to the messaging, and we can use it for just about anything.
Excellent.
That's my hope.
Thank you for sharing today. I do understand we're at time, so I'm probably going to abridge our open discussion, but just check real quick. So first of all, thanks again, Carter.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I'll be sure to send out the notes and YouTube links to everybody once I have them. But I wanted to know if there were any pressing news or issues or questions from the group. So I know we're kind of at the end, so I just want to not have me talk for a second and see if anybody had something they really wanted to bring up, because I don't want to deny anybody the opportunity. Okay, and I'll take that as we got most things covered. Closing out, just thank you again, Carter. This was good. I'll probably follow up with you outside class a little bit, because I got some ideas on our next version of the reference implementation that I want to iron out deeper.
Cool. Well, if anybody has any questions or opinions, or even just wants to yell at me, feel free to contact me any way you like.
His mailing address again is just kidding.
Oh no, go ahead, share it as much as you like, Charlie. But I like, just type Carter Bullard and you'll find me somehow.
But aside from that,
the time and the opportunity, Charlie, I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And might be a couple other questions coming in from OCA. I'm going to send those starting on the Slack. And if we don't get resolution, I'll feed that into next month's agenda, where we're going to have some of the guests from MITRE Ingenuity discuss attack flow and possibly an additional effort, not trying to be cryptic, but I don't remember the name of it right now. So thank you all very much. And I will see you all next month. I'm going to turn off the recording.